Hey pre-algebra students, this is the last section of Unit 4. The last section is section 4.8 on solving equations containing fractions. Now if you remember, all of Unit 3 was on solving equations. So let's do some review about how to solve equations. So let's review 3x minus 4 equals 20. To solve 3x minus 4 equals 20, first we want to see if we can simplify anything on both sides. Well, it looks like we can't simplify 3x minus 4 and we can't simplify 20. The next thing you do is get the variables on the same side, which they already are. And then you remember always remove the addition or subtraction first. So we can remove the minus 4 by adding the 4 over. So we have 3x equals 24. Then remove the 3. It's multiplied by 3, so do the opposite to get rid of it. Divide by 3. And you get x equals 8. Okay, same thing with x divided by 3 plus 8 equals 10. First you would minus the 10 over. You get x over 3 equals 2. To get rid of the x divided by 3 then, you would multiply by 3 to get rid of it. Multiply by 3. And you get x equals 6. Okay, so that's a little bit of a review from Unit 3 on solving equations. Now, this section, though, is going to be the same idea, the same concepts, except our equations are going to have fractions in them. For example, letter A, x minus 2/3 equals 5/12. Again, we're on your handout, letter A. So you would do the same thing, just as if it said y minus 2 equals 5. To get rid of a minus 2/3, you would do the opposite. You would add 2/3 to both sides. Okay? So the computer always writes it next to it, but I usually write it underneath it. Either way is fine. So add 2/3 to both sides. The 2/3 cancel out, and we're left with y equals 5/12 plus 2/3. Remember, in order to add fractions, you have to have common denominators, which in this case would be 12. So multiply the 2/3 by 4, the top and bottom, to get 12. So that gives us 5/12 plus 8/12, which yields 13 over 12. Okay, so the same concepts, except they're going to be fractions instead of whole numbers or negative numbers. So why don't you try letter B? It's very similar. Y plus 2/3 equals 5/12. Alright, now let's look at some harder ones, or different ones. 1/5 y equals 2. Okay, so this is letter C on your handout. Okay, so this means 1/5 times y equals 2. So to get rid of a 1/5 times y, you do the opposite, and you divide by 1/5. But remember, we don't usually divide fractions. Instead of dividing by 1/5, remember that's the same thing as multiplying by 5/1. So you can write divide by 1/5, but remember what we're actually going to do is multiply by its reciprocal of 5/1. So dividing by 1/5 is the same thing as multiplying by 5/1. So now we can multiply this. Remember, to multiply fractions, you multiply straight across. 2 times 5 is 10 over 1. So y equals 10 over 1, which is 10. Okay, let's go over to letter E, and let's take a look at that one. 3/4 x equals negative 1/8. Okay, again, to get rid of a 3/4 times x, you would need to divide by 3/4 to get rid of the multiplication. But remember, we don't usually divide fractions. Instead, we multiply by its reciprocal. So some people even like to write it right next to it. Times by 4/3, and all of those reduce away. So times the other side by 4/3. Okay, remember to reduce your fraction first. The 4 and the 8 can reduce. 4 goes into 4 once. 4 goes into 8 twice. Multiply straight across. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 3 is 6. And a negative times a positive is a negative. So that's a little bit messy, but you can see whenever you need to divide fractions, remember you multiply by the reciprocal. and then use your rules for multiplying fractions. Okay? So the PowerPoint here will take you through that same thing step by step. To get rid of the divide by 1 or multiply by 1/5, you multiply by 5/1. Okay, and this is the one we just did. To get rid of the 3/4, you multiply by 4/3 because that's the reciprocal of 3/4. Okay, so why don't you try to do letter D? 5/7 B equals 9. Okay, now let's look at letter F. Letter F says 5x equals negative 3/4. To get rid of the 5, again, you would divide by 5 here. But remember, we have a fraction divided by 5 isn't going to work. So instead of dividing by 5, we multiply by the reciprocal of that, which is 1/5. So dividing by 5 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/5, and we need to do that because we can't divide fractions. To divide a fraction, we multiply by its reciprocal. Now you'd see if you can reduce first. Nothing reduces here. So multiply straight across and you get negative 3/20. Okay, let's go on to some harder ones. So this is letter A here on the bottom of number 3. Now we have a whole equation with fractions. Y/8 plus 3/4 equals 2. So there's a couple ways to do this. You could do it the long way out and subtract the 3/4 over. Get your common denominator, and then times by 8 to get rid of the divide by 8. There is a shortcut to do this problem, though. You can multiply both sides by the least common denominator of all your fractions. As long as you multiply the left side and the right side by the same thing, it'll get rid of all your fractions. Okay? So this is 2/1, so our least common denominator of all of our fractions would be 8. So if we multiply everything in this equation by 8, what's going to happen is it's going to make it a nice, easy problem. Okay? So multiply 8/1 here, 8/1 here, and 8/1 here. Now we can do this because if you multiply one side by an equation by the same thing as the other side, you're not changing the equation. That was our multiplication property of equality. So for the first one, the 8's reduce to a 1 and a 1, and we're just left with y. The second one, the 4 and the 8, reduce to a 1 and a 2. 2 times 3 would be plus 6. And the last one, they're both on the top. 2 times 8 is 16. So by multiplying both sides by the least common denominator, it gets rid of all the fractions. You can do it because it's an equation. As long as you multiply both sides by the same thing, you're not changing it. And it gets rid of all the fractions and makes it nice and easy. So now we just have to minus the 6 over. We would get y equals 10. Okay, let's try another one. Let's look at letter B. Y/2 equals y/5 plus 3/2. Okay, we could go through this, try to get the y's together. That would be a mess. And then use what we know about fractions to solve it. Or we could use our shortcut and multiply everything by the LCD, which is 10. As long as you multiply both sides by 10, everything on both sides, you're not changing this equation. Okay? So the first one, the 10 and the 2, would reduce to a 1 and a 5. And we'd be left with 5y. The second one, the 10 and the 5, reduced to a 1 and a 2, and that would equal 2y. Make sure you put the equal sign there. And the last one, the 10 and the 5, would be reduced to a 1 and a 5. 3 times 5 is 15/1, which is 15. So by multiplying by that LCD, it gets rid of all the fractions, makes it nice and easy. Okay, now we have y's on both sides. Subtract the 2y over. So you get 3y equals 15, divide by 3, and y equals 5. Okay, so that's a little shortcut that you can use to solve these equations to save you some time and make them easier. If you want kind of the step-by-step for that, the PowerPoint here does have it. So the fractions are present. Multiply both sides by the LCD of the fractions, like we talked about. Okay, distribute or multiply each thing by that number, like multiply each by 8. Combine any like terms, and then go through your steps to solve the equation like we normally would. Okay, and then check your answer. So that's the one we just did. So why don't you try letter C on the handout. 2/3 x minus 1/5 equals 10. Multiply by the least common denominator to get rid of all those fractions and then solve the equation for x. Now it's important to remember that this only works for equations. Equations are where you can multiply both sides of the equal sign by the same thing and it doesn't change the equation. This would not work for an expression. For example, 9/10 minus y over 3. You couldn't multiply everything by 30 because there isn't an equation. There aren't two sides to multiply by 30. For this problem, you would just have to get a common denominator and do it out normally. Okay, so the least common denominator is 30. So the first one would become 27 over 30. The second one you have to multiply by 10 to get 10y over 30. Now you can subtract because there's a common denominator. You get 27 minus 10y all over 30. So again, this shortcut of multiplying everything by the least common denominator only works for equations. Okay? If it's an expression, you have to do it out with a common denominator. So why don't you try letter B on the bottom there? X over 3 plus 2 over 5. Okay, so that's it for section 4.8 and all of Unit 4. Please go ahead and have any questions, bring any questions that you have to class on this section, and we'll work on class on your homework in this section. Thank you.